Protesters over student debt is new here in the U.S., but over the last year and a half, we've seen thousands of students come out to protest tuition hikes and university privatization in London, Chile, and just last week in Montreal. They've all turned violent. Earlier, I spoke with student debt activist Larry Hales. I asked him, why don't we see students coming out in droves to protest the outrageous student debt crisis in this country? Why did it take the debt to hit $1 trillion before seeing actions like this organized on the ground? Here's his take.
Well, I think that part of it has to do with the fact that the general political consciousness here around the right to an education, all the way from kindergarten up to university, we've been used to paying for it for so long. So I think that partly has a little bit to do with it. And so people are told that if you want something and it's good, then you have to pay for it instead of it being a general right that you deserve because you are a human being and you deserve to be able to elevate yourself beyond, where you are in your life at that particular point.
Yeah, it definitely seems like people still are trying to achieve that American dream. And when it doesn't happen, there is an element of kind of denial that comes out of it. Larry, Obama and Romney, this is a hot topic, obviously, on the campaign trail. And Obama just said the other week that Michelle and him just alleviated their student loans just 8 years ago. Do you think that that's true? Or do you think he's just kind of politically pandering to the student vote?
It's hard to know. He and Michelle are worth quite a bit of money. I think that it came out that before he was president, their income was, it put them in the top, 0.5% of people in the country, not even the top 1%. So I can't imagine a situation where they were still owing on their student debt. But, who knows? I haven't got a chance to look at his bank account and where his money goes, but I know that they are a fairly wealthy couple.
Right, yeah. I mean, who knows with the amount of student debt that really exists, it is a possibility. I mean, I know he did go to Harvard Law. So what can the federal government really do about this predatory student loan industry? Is there anything they can do? Or are they just waiting on Congress to kind of figure it out?
Well, it's interesting. I was watching an interview with President Obama, and they were talking about what he's trying to get passed through Congress to not allow the interest rates on the student debt to double from 3.4 to 6.8%. And it's funny to me because people have a hard time paying at the current interest rate. And if you were to look at it, the total student debt is more than total credit card debt in this country. It's at $1 trillion. And they said 1 in 2 students graduate and don't have access to a job. So you're facing a whole generation of people that are going to be faced with whether or not they pay their student debt, or they have health care, or they have a place to live. And they don't, so I think that if the federal government can spend $20 trillion bailing out corporations and financial institutions, then it very well has the money to actually erase and wipe off the map completely all of student debt, which should be an obligation for it. We should be fighting for it to actually do that because, we have a right to education, and the average student graduates with, I think, somewhere over $23,000 in student debt that they have to pay back. So it's a tremendous financial burden on people. And all they're really trying to do is to participate in the society and try and survive and provide a useful service. That's why they go to school.
Well, unfortunately, students aren't really lobbying like the banks are to these political candidates. So I would imagine that has something to do with why they don't want to kind of expunge the debt of students. But if these interest rates are indeed frozen at 3.4%, wouldn't that extra $6 billion be absorbed on the taxpayer? And is that a vicious cycle to have taxpayer debt instead of, increasing it for students?
It is a vicious cycle. I mean, we've seen that we have no say in where our tax dollars go to anyway. So, the government will spend $750 billion on buying weapons of mass destruction and waging war on people. I think that really the thing that we should be fighting for, honestly, is not just to have, the interest rates stay where they are, but for students to not have to mortgage their future to get a higher education. Because the money exists there, the resources and the funds exist to actually make that happen.
Exactly. I mean, considering how half of all students in 2012 are unemployed and jobless. I mean, is it time to start rethinking higher education?
It is. You know, I mean, it's actually time to start thinking education in general in this country and where it's been going the past 30 years of standardized testing and dulling critical thinking skills and just preparing drones, you know, because the society itself and the corporations don't need, you know, as highly skilled workers as they once needed in different generations. And I think that partly has, you know, a lot to do with it, but it also represents what they're doing in education in general, that the banks and financial institutions are salivating on getting their hands on that, you know, that billions and billions of dollars that are spent on education. That's, you know, why you see the privatization that's actually happening. So we need to start talking about education in general, what it means and people's right to have it.
And switching the conversation just really slightly, you know, private universities like Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, I mean, their annual tuition rates are like something like $50,000. Why is it that you think that they have tax-exempt status, but they continue to gouge students year after year? I mean, isn't that kind of counterintuitive when they can be kind of helping to alleviate this debt?
Yeah, you would think so, but you know, GE also doesn't pay any taxes either, and there's a lot of corporations that get tax subsidies. If you look at Wisconsin, you know, they were talking about a state debt of like 137, you know, $1 million, and they gave Walmart, you know, $150 million or something like that in tax subsidies in the state, and so that would account for more than the so-called debt of that state. But you know, the private universities aren't the only ones that don't pay any taxes and get subsidies from the federal government.
So, continue.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, Larry, you're a student debt activist. Talk a little bit about what's going on. I know that you weren't able to make the protest today, but where do you see this going? You know, it hit $1 trillion today, the debt for student loans. Where do you see this going, and is this hopeful that people are finally galvanizing, going out there and really taking a stand against this?
It is hopeful. You know, we've been doing it for the past few years, especially after the crisis hit. And we started to see a more aggressive attack on education in general, especially through privatization. And, you know, we all got a shot in the arm with the Occupy Wall Street movement. And I think that has, you know, elevated this idea of the majority of people in a society being used and abused by the small, you know, percentage of the population, the super rich, the super wealthy. So the fact that they're raising wipeout student debt is important, and I think that it actually, you know, these struggles have to begin to merge with all the other struggles, the struggles against you know, the struggles for a moratorium and against foreclosures and evictions, you know, as well as the struggle against war and against racism and things of that nature. They have to merge and put together a general program of our interests and our needs as working people and students and children.
Indeed, students are part of the 99%, and let's hope that unlike Chile, London, and Montreal, that these protests don't get violent. That was Larry Hales, student debt activist.